industry who have themselves gone through the highs and lows of their career. So as part of the introduction of themselves, I've requested that they share their personal career development story review, to give you some interesting highlights of what brought them to where they are today and what drives them to keep going until now. So without further ado, let me start with Steve from DHL.
Hi, good afternoon everybody. So I'm going to have two actually, if I may, just quickly. So I think the two kind of key turning points in my personal career was I did a Master of Science degree in supply chain at Cranfield University in the UK. And I have to say that really did change my career. It's one of those courses where you kind of, you know a third of it, you kind of know a third of it, but you don't know what the right terminology is for it, and then you learn a third. And it was that third that I learned was really invaluable and really kind of allowed me to go on a fantastic trajectory for the rest of my career. So that was one point. And the second point is when I actually moved to Singapore. That was 3.5 years ago. And I, moving from Europe, which was then starting to be a little bit in the doldrums, to a very, very vibrant environment here. And frankly, with people who were also eager to learn and develop, has really kind of given me a complete new lease of life in terms of my own personal career. So those are my kind of two key points.
Thanks, Steve. Bipin Balakrishnan. I think I too have had two sort of epiphany kind of moments. One was when I was in university. I'm a lawyer by training. When I was in university, I used to do a lot of voiceovers for radio and television as well. And I was approached by a media house to change my career when I'd almost done about 80% of my legal studies. I decided against it because I didn't want to make a change. So that was one place where I kind of defined what I was going to do for the rest of my life. The second was when I sort of used my legal background and I took on a responsibility that no one else was willing to take on or they didn't find an appropriate person to take on in the organization that I was. I took on logistics and supply chain originally for Singapore, and then a larger logistics function, heading the logistics function for Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa. Again, I think that was a little bit of a turning point for me. I mean, as a lawyer, you're supposed to be a naysayer, you're supposed to be finding out what the risks are, moving away from that, and with my deep baritone voice, being able to get into something different, completely different, was a changing point in my life.
Hi, good evening everyone. My name is Manju Vijayan. I'm a Regional Director, Client Services with Logistics Executive Group. Keeping in with the theme of a couple of things that really changed my life. Unlike two separate instances, I would say for me it happened very simultaneously. One was returning to the workforce after having 2 children after a very long break. And at the same time, I returned into a completely new industry. To give some background to that, I have been working in recruitment for quite some time now and in Singapore since 2003. And I was in IT and banking. And my entry into supply chain happened at the same time that I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And I'd taken a break from work. I was returning to work after quite a long gap. And you'd think I'm a recruiter, I know how to find a job for myself, but it was astonishingly hard. And that was probably quite a light bulb moment because you realize how hard it is for a returnee, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, but more so if you're a woman who's taken a break for family reasons because you are instinctively seen as not career-minded or not somebody who's serious about their future and their prospects. So that was a huge turning point for me, securing that first opportunity for the people who gave me the break to come back into the industry. That's Justine, actually. I joined Justina's team after almost 3 years of not working. That was also my entry point into supply chain and logistics. Another huge turning point for me was when I joined Logistics Executive Group. And in the last 2.5 years, I'm quite pleased to say that I've come a very long way from where I started as a very frightened, insecure returning mom with no opportunities to heading up to key pillars for our business across the Asia region. Thank you.
My name is Jim Whalen. I'm president of Asia for Intra. I think many people here are familiar with Intra. Two things that come to mind for me is one is, I would say, taking risks, taking calculated risks or managed risks in your career. And the second I would say is also embracing or not fearing change. I too made a major career change in industry. I spent about 25 years in the telecommunications industry, and just 6 years ago made a change into logistics with Intra. And then just 5 months ago, I made a move out here to Singapore to take on the President of Asia position for about a 2-year assignment. And so just, I think taking those risks, feeling comfortable with those changes, feeling confident in yourself, are key elements in success.
Thank you. You can see that there's some commonalities. I think mostly is the opportunity, whether it's into a exciting company environment or into a new region, where you sort of expose yourself to new experiences, will give you the opportunity to develop and be successful. We'll move on to discuss the issues that we're going to discuss today in talent management. So to set a little bit of background, there have been a couple of surveys released recently. For example, one by the Harvard Business Review, where they surveyed the leaders in Asia, and it was found that talent attraction and retention were viewed as top risks right after natural disasters and economic upheaval. And another survey done by Barn and Company was that 70% of the respondents they surveyed in Asia viewed supply chains as a top priority, but less than half felt that the organizations were ready to support that, with the talent issue as one of the key factors. So with that, I'd like to invite the panel to share the challenges they face in seeking key supply chain leaders, and what traits, specifically what kind of traits do they identify or look for when they try to groom, attract potential to be the leaders. And going on to that, especially in the Asian region, where there seems to be a gap in the local talent pool, what is that gap? Why is it that it seems that within the local talent pool, the traits for leadership don't seem to exist, and how can we close that gap? What can we do to groom the future leaders within Asia? So I'll start off with Steve again.
Yeah, so I think it's, for me, this is an extremely important subject, and for DHL as well. And I think it is true that, in general, talent is one of our key constraints of growing our business, particularly in this region. And I think, when you consider that supply chain is becoming ever more complex, it's developing. We heard some of the presentations earlier today that demonstrate that. And we have to continue to get people who can keep up with the pace of that and the growth. Yeah. So both together is a significant impact on organisations. From our point of view, we try to do two things at DHL. So we have a talent program, which looks at a relatively small number of people who are high potential and who we believe could have access to the top 2 levels of the organisation here in APAC, and we really kind of invest a lot of focus in those people. And then we have a kind of second program, which we call the transition program, which is looking at how do we meet our growth requirements for the next 5 years by developing our people. So we have both formal parts to that and informal parts to that. And one of the informal parts is to encourage everybody to have a personal development plan and to meet regularly with their manager and discuss and drive that plan with a very clear understanding that the person who's responsible for their development is them themselves. But also we try to identify what the skills are that we need across the enterprise and make sure that we're providing a more structured training around those skills so that we can meet our requirements. And we calculate it down to the number of operators, the number of supervisors, managers at all various levels through the organisation that we're going to need, and so that we can calculate what we need to grow in terms of talent in the business. It's fairly early on in that process, but we are determined that we're going to make it work. Our high potential development approach, the top 50 managers in the business have been trained, including myself, as mentors, and we'll all be mentoring at least 2 or 3 people as part of that process. And I think that's also a good part of this, because that's about imparting your own knowledge and trying to support these guys coming through the organisation.
How would you define high potential? What's the criteria?
Yeah, so the criteria is that they could get to the top 2 levels of the organisation here in Asia Pacific, and that they are willing to be mobile across the region. And they've got to be willing to move to another location within 3 years. So there's a kind of a little bit of administrative piece that we go through, but that's the criteria that effectively we set.
And do you see a lot of do you see a lot of local talent being developed in your organization?
Yeah, in fact, almost all of the talent that is in that high potential talent pool is local, actually, which is really, really good. So we've really put a lot of effort into doing that. And you know, one of the things that I'm trying to do in my own part of the organisation is try and grow the local talent specifically. And you know, there's kind of 2 or 3 people that we have my job in a couple of years' time. They're all actually locals. So that's really, really nice. And I think we're all trying to do that. We're all very conscious of the fact that we need to more and more grow our local talent, not just here in Singapore, by the way, but across the whole of the region.
If I may just add on to what Steve just said about the grooming the talent that you have. I'll come to the local talent part maybe a little bit later, but I fully agree with what Steve said about having to groom and have your own internal pipeline. That seems very counterproductive because I am a headhunter, but setting that aside, we strongly advise, actually we advise and endorse that all our clients, what we say is that every company must be able to fulfill at least 1/3 of their recruitment requirements internally. You must be able to do that. What that means is that you have a ready pipeline to fill some of your existing vacancies. If you can't do that and you're outsourcing all 100% of it, then it's time to stop and look inward to see what you're doing wrong, because it clearly means that you don't have a succession plan for any of your employees. At least 1/3 of your requirements, you should be able to do it internally. Another 1/3 should come through your internal referrals and your other systems. And probably the last 1/3 is what you should be outsourcing outwards into your service providers, because that shows that you are actually doing something to invest in your employees. And a very good way of doing that is actually by making sure that you identify your future leaders early on in the business. It's not very hard to do. You just talked about high performance in the business. It's not hard to see somebody who's doing really well and who's showing great promise. The problem is that a lot of businesses still see putting money in employee development and growth as an expense rather than an investment, which is what it is. You invest today, like for instance at Logistics Executive, we have the Logistics Academy where we have a comprehensive suite of education and training programs for logistics and supply chain professionals at virtually every level, from freshers who are in the industry to your planners, to your managers, even to directors. And if you're at a very senior level, even for your senior managers, when you want to have a pipeline ready, if your director moves to another country or they leave the job and join the competition, you're going to go out to market to look for someone new. Instead, what if you had somebody who was almost there and just needed a little bit of guidance and who could step up into that role already? Executive coaching, that's a fantastic way of doing it. Nobody really thinks of all that because a lot of organizations still see it as a cost factor rather than an investment, which is probably, I think, something they should look at. And I know it's easier said than done because there's a lot of players involved, budgets involved, but looking at it from a very macro perspective, it's probably something I think that businesses should think of a little more.
Sure. I would say for Intra being a small company, although I don't think it's unique to a small company, particularly in Asia where you look at so many markets, so many diverse markets, and how do you get resources and leadership in so many different countries, is just from a practical perspective, a company like ours that has a very flat management structure, how do you get the mentoring in place to develop the leadership and the senior and executive management in place? So my role here is an example where the company put me in place here in Asia. We're headquartered in New Jersey. We're a very centralized organization, centralized decision making. So having someone in the region as a leader, as a starting point, then become a coach and a mentor, identify the talent locally, manage that talent locally. But also myself, it's maybe somewhat unique or interesting is my role is actually a relatively short-term assignment of 2 years, because one of my responsibilities here is to actually find my replacement, so that for a company that operates, a small company operating around the world, in terms of bringing someone on an executive level, trust, the responsibility put in that person, a way to get there was to have myself come out here with the relationship I already have with the executive team, and then build up the team, create the coaching, the mentoring, establish that, and then also find our replacement, so what's left behind is something sustainable here on its own.
You shared earlier that GM has also a sort of a leadership development program in the US. It's very successful and has now been imported into Asia. And you see the success rate being fairly high. Could you share some of that?
Yeah, that's right, Justina. I think one of the programs that has been really successful in the US has been, working with universities, and we have something called a track program, and we go to universities, we go to local universities, and rather than just go at the time of recruitment, we go ahead of time, we actually engage with talent, we try and work with them, there are projects, and it gives them a insight into multiple functions within the General Motors organization. It has been hugely successful in the United States, and it's been rolled out into this part of the world as well. I see the success of that driven by one key factor. To my mind, that's really important. And I just want to check how many lawyers are there in the room? Yeah, so one. How many core finance professionals? People who have done finances, they're starting of their careers. Okay. 1, 2. We don't cross-pollinate enough. We do not get other functions to come and do supply chain. And I think it's a key element for developing successful supply chain leaders. To be able to understand and bring in ideas which are core to, say, law, or to get in something from finance, or to get in something from marketing. The amount of fresh ideas that can be developed is just incredible. And I owe part of my success to the fact that I'm not a traditional supply chain person. I moved into it because I thought that I could contribute to it, and probably, was lucky enough to have good coaches, mentors throughout my career, one of whom is in the audience today. It's a combination of those factors, but I think we don't cross-pollinate enough, and I think that's a very important part.
So at this point, I'm gonna, put it to the audience.
I think it's twofold. One is because the organizations are not bold enough, have not thought through this enough to make that change, to be innovative enough to say that, okay, let me just do something slightly different. So that's one part. And I'm not saying that every lawyer is going to be successful in a supply chain organization, or a finance professional is going to be successful in a supply chain organization. But we need to have that. We need to have multiple types of people within the organization. The second reason is because we ourselves, as employees, are not we are risk averse. We're not our ability to take risks is limited. So we don't venture out, and we're not wanting to try something new. And that, I think, is a big limiting factor as well. I think that's primarily the two reasons.
I mean, just add on to what Wade said. Sorry, I think another factor is also that our industry is really handicapped by the fact that it's not as glamorous or sexy as banking or IT or finance.
Exactly, that's what I was coming to.
Yes.
I think there's a very, very sad, wrong perception of supply chain. One, I think there's a fundamental flaw in our educational system that does not promote supply chain, for example. We believe that supply chain is an integral part of commerce, modern commerce. But if you look at all the educational institutions, whatever you can do law, you can do even business, there isn't even a unit within the academic syllabus that provides some form of training. You don't need to specialize in it, but it does not even have a unit within the core structure of the education system. Secondly, the supply chain industry has been perceived as an ugly neighborhood, sort of, because it started particularly in Singapore. You talk about logistics. The history of it, unlike Europe, where they have a lot of other promotion internship, it starts from the perception that logistics is just lorry drivers. And I came from that, not a lorry, I came from one of the early part whereby one of the few early people who took on the profession, that has got a tertiary education background. But that is the set perception. So if we are talking about industry, we want to go forward, I think all of us as a part will change the perception. And I think we can do that.
I completely agree, and I think that is the role change. When we talk about supply chain leaders, that is what we sitting in this room are that's what we need to do. We need to change the mindsets. We need to change within our organizations as well. Because, I've attended enough of seminars and conferences and interacted with enough number of people within the supply chain organizations to know that it's always a challenge to be able to push the supply chain agenda and be at the table when actual strategic decisions are being made. We don't get the opportunity. In many cases, we don't get the opportunity. How do you get at the table? That's the critical point.
I just want to take a minute to say that I actually think supply chain and logistics is very sexy. I joined it 6 years ago. After 25 years, look at us. But I think there's an image and there's a marketing aspect to it, maybe not just educational. But I think maybe because of the type of company we are from a technology perspective, there's also the aspect of technology and investments to be made and what type of talent you attract with that, right? So Intra is a company that brings technology innovation to the market in the industry, and I think companies need to promote that, make those investments, and when you look at, I look at my younger kids that are older now and working, they have grown up with technology that is just implicit in the way they live their life, not just what they therefore then what they expect in their jobs. So it's not the only thing, but I think you've got to look across multiple dimensions, and I think that technology investments are possibly lacking in the industry, and that itself brings a different type of set of candidates and employees to the industry too.
Just to add on to what both Ed and Jim have said, continuing in the vein of why is it that we can't attract the younger generation or the next batch of talent in the industry, is also largely because, like you said, there are no modules, even a single module in any of the disciplines, unless you're doing a specific program for supply chain or logistics. There's nothing that caters to our industry as such. And like Jim, I've only been here for 5 years, and I can't see myself working anywhere outside of supply chain and logistics. It's also that I think the industry does not participate enough towards going to universities or colleges or taking time to actually advocate to students on what the industry is all about. The perception about logistics is still warehouses, trucking, couriers in uniform. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's dirty, it doesn't pay much. That's basically it. People don't understand what supply chain means, that it touches every aspect of your life every single day. I had the opportunity to address a batch of students from the UOW, University of Wollongong, a few months ago. They were at the PSB Academy in Singapore, and they were from the business division of, that was the degree discipline they were doing. And halfway through, I could tell they were all bored because no one wanted to work in supply chain. So I just said, okay, how many of you are really looking to work in supply chain? And I think one person put his hand up. So I said, do you know what the CEO or maybe a managing director of a supply chain business makes? And I just gave them a number. I said, you easily over $250 million, and you would see everyone sitting up straight. Because they don't realize, and it's not just about the money, it's also about what supply chain really means. There is zero interest from the students. And tying it back to a talent perspective also, we are running short of people. Right now, there are people in their 30s and 40s who are working today in logistics and supply chain. Where are the people in their 20s? Where is the next generation going to come from? Where are you going to get your freshers who are going to start in your departments in customer service or in planning or in demand or even in the warehouses? Where are you going to get them from? We need to keep the pipeline open one way or the other. And the way to do that is to go to the students because they're not going to come to you. If they have an option of working at Apple or an IBM and for in 3PL company, for them what they see is dollar signs, pushing offices, and that's all they see because they don't know better. And I think it's our job as an industry to educate them and change that.
Can I ask a question? I think, Manju, I agree with you. The term supply chain has been misused because people have a connotation, and gentleman said earlier, logistics, warehousing was the old term. Now it's supply chain. People don't understand that supply chain is not logistics or warehousing. And I think that's why also the term here, logistics supply chain, is slightly incorrect. Logistics is part of supply chain. The supply chain is not logistics. I think this is the term that we have to be correct. But on education, I think there's a very important role to play in general. But can I ask a question, I think maybe directed at Steve? We talk about talent development and talent management. And when you hear talent management in a company, especially a big company, you normally associate talent development with the top 20%. But what do you do with the 80% of the organization? Don't they have talent? How do you manage the talent that is not a high flyer? Maybe it's the pillar, the high contributor. And what do we do to avoid demotivating the 80% and motivating 20%?
So that's a really good question. So we just introduced a year ago, actually across our whole enterprise globally, what we call certified supply chain specialists. So this is a way of looking at all of our employees, every single one of them, and starting with a foundation of actually understanding what it is to be part of the supply chain industry. We've taken every single one of our employees here in Asia Pacific, that's nearly 40,000 people over the last 12 months, through a 2-day training course, looking at what it means to be a supply chain specialist and what it means to be part of DHL supply chain. That's focused on what their role is, and not specifically their individual role, but what role do we play, both in the organisation but also in the world. And we talk about being an essential part of everyday life. So I think it came out of the discussion we just had, and I think you mentioned, VP, about you've got to look internally at selling the value of what we do as well. So, and you think about what we do in supply chain, we are all an essential part of everyday life. We wouldn't be here now, we wouldn't have the clothes we're wearing if we didn't have effective supply chains. And then we can also talk about 3 essentials that we need as an organisation to meet our customers' needs, which is around having a can-do attitude, right first time, and passion. And very simple concepts, but this is important because I think part of the whole talent debate is how do we both develop people, but also how do we retain people in our organisation as well. Because if you develop them and they will leave, then they're off. So this is part of the retention, part of the development, and we are going to be adding more and more modules to that certified supply chain specialist approach as we go on through the next few years. And in fact, that will be our primary development process for all of our employees. And we're very excited about it. We've had fantastic response from rolling out the foundation, and we're now looking forward to kind of rolling out individual operations courses and also leadership courses as well.
Joe, if I may just add to what Steve just said, one of the things that actually GM does pretty well, I've looked at it and I was pretty impressed, is trying to understand what the aspirations of the employees are. And to the distinction that you were making about the 20% versus the 80%, what does come out is a vast majority of the populace is actually fine doing what they're doing, with regular sort of small steps ahead, rather than being all 100% being crazy ambitious. So when you map out what is the individual's aspiration and map it against what the organization requires, and each, like you mentioned, each of them is actually doing a great job and a very important job. So to manage their expectations in a manner which is in keeping with their capabilities and their aspirations, I think is what needs to be done as well.
Yeah, I just have something to share about the sexiness of this industry. I worked for almost 30 years now. I went through 4 different industries. This one is the longest, 12 years. But more importantly, basically, I think what we had forget to highlight that there's some hero actually in the supply chain industry. People forget the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, is actually a supply chain guy. So he's now, heading one of the biggest company in the world. And basically, for a supply chain guy to be the most sexiest company in the world, right? Apple. So I think something that we forgot to sell to people that is actually a supply chain person. And I can say that basically there's certain tribes for people in the supply chain business. I think people need to be hands-on, people are curious enough to explore, and people are brave enough to move around different parts of the world. I think maybe as talent searcher or a HR person, these are some of the tracks we need to look out for. People are venturous enough, people are curious, people are willing to deal with the lowest denominator and able to talk at the highest level. These are the people. People with this kind of personal track will be the best guy to be able to succeed in supply chain. And I think we need more team code. I think we need to think of more of this big name to sell to the young people. You see, the most sexiest company in the world is Apple. Who is running Tim Cook? Which used to be from Dell, right? So these are all. So I just want to share with you because I think it's very important. I always feel that I'm from IT business before I moved to here. At first I feel like everybody, I'm moving to a very brick and mortar kind of business. But after almost now it's 14 years, I feel that I'm into a very sexy business because as e-commerce, right? E-commerce is a very sexy spot. In fact, if you really are in supply chain, I think for the next 5 to 10 or 15 years, your salary will go up a lot because if you can figure out how to, move the DNA, to do a last mile delivery and the cheapest and basically as the most efficient, your salary will triple. And I say this is something we sell to young people. It's the sexiest, and in fact, that a lot of money will go inside. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On a personal note, I could also share that the reason why I stepped into the supply chain industry was when I was during my university studies. I did a exchange program in the US, and then they were having career talks and internship programs. And I attended the talks by Kimberly Clark and P&G, and I was highly inspired to join the industry, like really pumped. And the whole hall was full of students, So I think it helps, companies with strong brand names to spend some time talking to students to kind of understand that the industry can offer you a lot of opportunities. And when your HR needs come with the campus recruitment, maybe don't delegate it to someone in the downline. Go yourself and inspire the people, inspire the students who's going to be your next generation leaders, and honestly, this is really going to take up just 1 hour, 2 hours of your time, but that could save you, quite a number of years of pain in terms of talents in the future. And check the time. Okay, still have some time. Okay, so maybe we look at, in terms of, let's maybe talk about the cross-pollination. We talk about, getting people from other functions, getting interested in supply chain, but how about just the crossover between service providers and the manufacturers? In terms of your experience, how successful do you see that? What's the value? and how much more can we promote that. Also, in terms of encouraging more women participation, I think if we look around the room, there's still more male-dominated industry at the moment. So, are we still doing enough to attract women into the workforce in this industry, which I believe could be quite a formidable force for the industry? And also, any challenges in dealing with the next generation of employees, the combination with Gen Y, Gen Z, the strawberry generation. Is that a challenge? Is that what the company now needs to do to recruit differently? Social media being used now in your recruitment strategies to constantly engage your younger workforce, for example.
I'm going to take that. Yeah. I noticed that some people are smiling because when I started introducing myself, I left out the fact that diversity and inclusion is a very big part of my own personal agenda. It's something I strongly believe in because it's been a part of my journey and my struggle as well. Of course, not working in supply chain previously, I was probably blind to it. But coming into supply chain, yes, like Justina pointed out, I completely agree. If you look at the audience, it's like maybe 15% of women. And I've been here since morning today. I think this is the first panel. We have a female moderator and one panelist. Sorry, but that's a very poor show, I must say. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Malaysia at a conference and I moderated a panel on encouraging diversity to drive innovation across supply chains. And it was a great panel. We had some fabulous panelists with some very good work. But sadly enough, on that conference as well, out of 60 speakers, we had like 7 women speakers. There are just not enough women in the industry. And when women make up 50% of your available workforce and your industry is speaking about, oh, we don't have people, we're running short of talent, is it really a shortage of talent? Or are we just not tapping into what is out there? Because, like I said, again, to go back to my own personal story, I'm a recruiter, I've been in recruitment for a very long time, and I struggled to find myself a job when I was looking for work. And a lot of the response was tied to the fact that, mom with young kids wouldn't be able to put in extra time. There was no interest on the part of organizations to look at somebody who was a little bit different, square peg for a square hole. They wanted a certain kind of person. They were not willing to look at anything outside of that. And I see that every day today as working in executive search. I see that companies are still, unfortunately, very resistant to hiring anyone they see as different. They just don't want to go down that path. They just want the easy path. This is what I have. This is exactly what I want. We get a lot of pushback when we try to sell them something that even looks slightly different. But even in Asia, because like women said, we're very risk averse. What companies need to do is really look at tapping at resources which are very available, but probably don't fit your standard mold. There is a lot of talent out there. And as to women in the workforce, I think generally this applies to all employees in general. Companies need to really be willing to empower their workforce. We talked about why, especially at senior levels, we don't see a lot of Asians. That was one of the questions you asked. So there's a lot of, foreign talent in the industry, particularly in our supply chain 3PL industry and at very senior levels. Culture is a very big part of that. I think Asians are, yes, we are very risk averse, and it's also the blame lies with the organizations. Are we giving our employees enough support at the back end? Are we allowing them to make decisions? Are we allowing them to make mistakes? Are we allowing them to learn? Is there a safety net for them? There isn't really. A lot of companies, even in Asia still today, we are very stuck on procedure, we're stuck on rules, we're stuck on policies, and it's just that. We're just blinded by the blinkers we have on. You need to empower your workforce. You need to let them know that, yes, as they're moving up the ladder, allow them to make decisions. And this is something I've seen in my own personal growth. Since I started with Logistics Executive, I've been with them for 3 years now. I've made so many mistakes along the way, but I'm here where I am today because I knew that if I fall, there's someone to catch me. And every employee in your team has to have that kind of, in the back of their mind that they're not alone and there's somebody to support them.
I completely agree with Manju. I have at home, I have my wife and my daughter. At work, I indirectly report into the CFO, who's a lady for the region. I started line reporting to a lady in the US. So both my bosses at work also are women. And my organization is run. The CEO of General Motors is one of the most powerful ladies in business today, Mary Barra. So I'm blessed. It's actually going back to what Manju is saying. I think it is important. It is extremely important for organizations to open up their minds. And this is, I think this is the constant theme across all kinds of things that we're debating today about human resources. It's how you think, how are you able to step out of the box? I know these are classic cliches that we use all the time, but how do you actually put it into practice? When you do something on a daily basis, do you really look out for, how can I get someone who is, who brings equal amount of talent, intelligence, drive, ambition, and all of that, but look at something which is different. How willing are we to actually open up our minds to involve other people? That really is the question.
Yeah, can I just add something to this? Because it's very interesting. I've recruited a few people into my team since I've been here, not many, but I have to say, of all of the people that have been put forward to me, either by my internal HR department or by recruitment companies, in 3 roles, I think I've had less than 1 handful of women that have been put forward. In fact, I think definitely less than 1 handful. And I think there's a general issue that we need to kind of do some soul searching about here. Because I think we really have to ask ourselves, what is it we're not doing that doesn't attract women into our industry and into the kind of roles that we're looking to fill? And I think it starts all the way through the organisation. I think it starts in our mindset. And I think it's interesting if you have women at the top of the organisation, how that might change some of the mindset. But I really think we need to do some real soul searching, because for me, there's something fundamentally broke about this. And by the way, it's no different in Europe from where I've come from. It's the same kind of issue, and you see the same kind of demographic in a room like this. But I think we have to tackle it, because we are missing out on 50% of the workforce pretty much. And we can't say we've got a talent gap if we are not picking from the other half of the workforce.
Can I make a comment? I perfectly agree with Manju's comment, all of the comments made. If I could just say that clearly the quality of managers and leadership is important in getting this balance between the competencies of people. Doesn't matter if you're male, female, Asian, European, whatever, is the competencies. And keeping that balance is very important. And sometimes when you have weak leaders, they're always afraid to be challenged. If you don't be challenged, don't disturb me, keep me, and that's the problem. And that's the breakthrough. And unfortunately, in the industry, there's too much of that latency that you say, oh, don't disturb, give me a quiet day, let me get on with it, and easy way out. On the question of making mistakes and learning, Manju, you're absolutely correct. Learning is through making mistakes, and organizations that allow people to have the space to make mistakes will learn. Unfortunately, today the consequence of making mistakes, the rules of compliance, obligation, fiscal obligations, regular obligations, make it a high cost, high risk. The consequence of that is that people don't push the bar, they don't take risks, so they just take the easy way out, and that's bad for organizations. So what organizations should do is develop a training methodology which allows them a safe environment to make mistakes, to learn how to move forward, and therefore they don't have to shrink back into an organization and not take risks, not push the bar. Because you've got to push the bar, otherwise people take the easy way out. So training, in not only in personal competence, but also in models, in risk environments, is very important. And that's a different mindset again. So if you can't give people the space to make risks and learn, you've got to create another environment where they can learn, in a safe environment where they can have confidence to move forward. But if people don't have the confidence to take decisions, and make decisions, and take some risks, they won't grow, the organization suffers.
Julia, we have time for one more. Something else?
Yeah. So thanks, Manju. The whole session turned towards the diversity inclusion. But since you said it, in Huntsman, I got 17 people in Singapore office and 16 are female. In Thermo Fisher, I had 17 people, 15 female. So, and that's not by accident, it was by design anyway. So my question is not on diversity inclusion. My question, I've been hearing this particular word talent gap, and I always have a different opinion on the word talent gap. And I strongly feel we do not have a talent gap. Probably we have a gap in the leaders not able to nurture and identify talent today. If you look at the management development programs at the defense side of the management, people today are so goddamn busy on phone, meetings, travels, making reports of losses and attending night calls. How the hell do you develop talent today? Because we're not doing that today, develop talent. In future, we always have a trap of not having a talent because we never develop a talent in the first place. So to me, it's not a question of having a talent gap, it's a question of gap in not able to identify and nurture and develop talent. I know it's going to open the Pandora's box for discussion until tomorrow morning.
Can I just make a comment on that? I think it's a really good point. Interestingly, that Certified Supply Chain Specialist course that I spoke to earlier, actually that is run by management. It's not run by traders. Our HR department have nothing to do with it. So we are all on our main board, we're all trained facilitators. I had to go through a 7-day training course. It was tough. Toughest 7 days of my life, actually, to learn how to be a facilitator, not a manager. Wow, it's tough. But the whole board have been through that, and every board of every country in our business has either gone through or is going through that same training, and they are responsible for delivering the training. And that's how you get real commitment. And that's the kind of time that you have to put in. So we're focused on doing at least 5 courses every year. That's 10 days of our time, completely wiped out, plus probably another 5 days preparing for it.
Just quickly, I'm going to wrap up. For a company like DHL, I think it's great what they're doing, but not all businesses can afford to train their senior management to cascade it down towards the rest of their staff. So Sanjay, the answer to your question is who has the time to do it in their own businesses? That's why people like us exist. Meet me outside, I'll tell you how we do it.
So I think
no, I'm going to have to disagree with that. No company can fulfill all of its needs internally. That's why you have vendors for rendering services that you don't have the capacity for, or the time for, or the money for.
But a larger portion has to come from.
It has to come. I
And
mean,
the two of you are maybe outside yes?
I think as a small company, we can't rely on a lot of the infrastructure around training, and we do have that. We have listening skills training, so you're actively listening and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's a personal responsibility, right? That you take because it's really day to day. It's cumulative. It's your interaction with the people. It's what you do, the feedback you give, the listening, the coaching, and you just have to do that day to day. And I think to me that's maybe 80% of the effectiveness of mentoring and coaching and bringing talent along.
Okay, so we've run out of time, and if you're interested to discuss this topic further, I believe most of us will be outside during the drinks. So please feel free to restart the discussions outside.
It was very interesting after a few drinks.
Even more interesting, yes. So thank you very much to the panel. Very insightful perspectives, and thank you to such a great audience.